If you're at the start of your wine export journey, trying unsuccessfully to find the right import partner, I may have something that can help. As host of Interpreting Wine, I've interviewed 166 winemakers, 20 masters of wine, 26 international sommeliers, and 31 importers from the UK, US, and Austria. So I know a thing or two about what it takes to engage the wine trade, who make up 70% of my audience. I'm offering the chance to discover your export readiness score. Take the test and you'll receive a personalized report outlining how to increase your winery's impact in your target markets. All for free, and it takes less than 3 minutes. Just visit interpretingwine.com/export-ready and take the wine export scorecard today. That's interpretingwine.com/export-ready. I'm Lawrence Francis, host of the Interpreting Wine podcast, the place to learn from thought leaders in the world of wine and marketing. Welcoming you to this special two-part series looking at the current state of Spanish Enotourism in the wake of the pandemic. My guest today is Vinka Danitza, a wine tourism professional based in Priorat. As project manager for Priorat Enoturisme, she is developing and coordinating various projects to enhance the visitor experience, maximize regional tourism, and increase the direct sales potential of group members. We hear her origin story and she gives us an Enotourism 101, talks COVID-19 adaptations in Priorat, reactions to the pandemic in different tourist sectors, digitizing customer interaction, travel literature, Vinka's current Enotourism project, and she looks ahead for 2021. Enjoy.
I got into wine actually a little bit later, I guess later in my career, because I didn't actually start wine until I was in my 30s. And prior to that, I basically did a kind of traditional path, which would be starting in university, doing my undergraduate. But then I kind of skewed out of that, and then I wanted to travel. And I spent quite a few years basically working, living abroad, traveling. So I kind of, my main thing was to see the world and experience different cultures and just kind of immerse myself in that. And through that, kind of get different perspectives and gain different ideas about what it is I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then when I moved back to Toronto and I thought it was time for, settling down or whatever, it was at the same time that I got the wine bug. So I started taking the WSET courses and I thought that was really cool. And I was like, yeah, wine is really neat. And then basically through wine, I started traveling again. Yeah. I went to Napa to do the WSET level 3. Then after that, I basically quit all my jobs that I had because I was working at quite a few jobs at the time and just saving up money. And that was great because I was able to take a year off, do like a sabbatical. I went to Portugal, which was a place that I had basically fallen in love with wine. And there I was there for about a year, just kind of soaking myself in wine and immersing myself in the culture and kind of getting to know people, grapes, everything. So that was awesome because it gave me a kind of maybe an unusual or what could I say? Maybe a little bit non-traditional way of entering the wine world. It was basically out of interest, curiosity, passion, and a huge passion for travel through wine. So then I got a scholarship to study in Europe, the Erasmus Wine Tourism Innovation Scholarship that's done in Spain, France, and Portugal, which obviously was fantastic because it allowed me to travel to these different places, allowed me to study wine and also to have different work experiences in wine. So through that program, I was able to study enology, viticulture, marketing, obviously tourism, and work in different areas of the wine industry, which was, something that I to this day, it's just a dream come true, because living in Bordeaux, for example, I would have never imagined that before. And it was just something that was amazing. And then after that, I started working for Wines of Portugal. After I graduated, I worked as a wine tour guide, freelance, but also for different wineries. And then I moved back to Spain in the last year and a half because I had the opportunity to do my doctorate. So I'm doing my PhD, but I also wanted to gain different experiences in wineries. And I worked as the marketing director for Viñedos y Bodegas Sierra Cantabria. They're located in Rioja. And I was there for about a year. And an opportunity came up here closer to the university where I'm studying to work as a project manager with Priorat Enoturisme, or Priorat Wine Tourism. So it is a bit of a difficult year because of COVID and obviously the lockdown and many things that are happening. But at the same time, it's a great opportunity to be able to develop different projects, which is exactly what I'm doing with the team at Priorat Enoturisme. And basically developing different projects and trying to blend in marketing, technology, and tourism all together to be able to launch different tools for wine tourism for wine tourists that will come and discover Priorat after the pandemic or after the lockdown.
Such a fascinating story, and I think the way that people get into wine is always really interesting for me as well. And I think that really, you being what I would term as like an enotourism expert now, I think you're uniquely positioned because of that experience and what you're currently doing, is to maybe unpick a little bit of the, I guess that what is enotourism, kind of from a slightly academic point of view, like what were, looking back, what were kind of some of the key tenets that you've been taught through your studies, and kind of give us an idea of the kind of the current state of play of what is enotourism. Obviously, then dipping across into the real life and maybe giving some examples. But I'm just curious, what is the sort of the current state of play of enotourism, and what in starting academic and then moving across into a real world setting.
Sure. So I guess the most academic way of describing enotourism or wine tourism is visitations to vineyards, wineries, wine regions, or any other area that has wine production or wine producing facilities for the purposes of understanding wine and connecting with wine. Mm-hmm. That would be a very broad and general term, because the reality is that wine tourism is quite broad and general. You could have wine tourism in an urban area at a wine bar, just like you could have wine tourism in a very rural area going to the cellar. So they are both considered wine tourism. They're just in different areas. And the key of any successful wine tourism program is to have create experiences that actually use emotions to connect with your tourist or the end consumer. So that's the most important part of it. And then obviously it's the link with wine and the people, essentially. One of the most important things of any wine tourism program is to be able to connect with people. Now, what I mostly do and what I focus on is everything that's in the winery. So winery visits, cellar visits, mainly looking at rural wine regions that are developing wine tourism, because I'm the kind of person, and this is my personal, choice, is I'm the kind of person that likes to go to the source. And I say this to quote Kermit Lynch, who, I'm not sure if you've read his book, Adventures on the Wine Route. It's a fantastic book, and I think it's something that's really, it's not often quoted enough in wine in general, and then in wine tourism it hardly exists, but essentially it is like almost like a glimpse into what it's like to travel into wine regions and to have these cultural experiences, not just in the winery, but everything that is part of a region. So restaurants, hotels, locals, people you interact with, and that all forms part of the tourist experience. So that is something that really, I think that's something that really that I connect with most, because I have more of that traveling spirit, because I did spend a lot of time traveling and living abroad. That for me is really exciting. And I think that is a lot of tourists look for the same thing. So they want to go to a region where they can feel sort of this cultural connection. They can, in a sense, they want to live out maybe a dream or a fantasy of being in rural Italy and, seeing the family and the grandpa and the grandma all eating at the table, or having this sense of community. And these are little things that obviously sometimes they're stereotypes and cliches, but other times they're reality. You'll go and visit a wine region or a small winery, a boutique winery, and you'll have mom, dad, the grandkids, or the kids and grandparents and things like that, all forming part of the wine making process. Just like you can have another experience, which would be a very luxury experience, looking at more of a high-end sector, high-value tourists, those that are looking for maybe Michelin star restaurants in addition to their wine experiences. So there's all things you can do with wine tourism. And I think that's one of the things that makes it such a powerful marketing and communication tool, is that you can cater to very different segments that are not the wine nerd, not the person that is particularly interested that much in wine. What they want is the experience. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that is missing a lot in the conversation of wine tourism, is focusing on the fact that there are different types of tourists. It's not always the ones that want to live, go to the Michelin star restaurants or have this luxury experience or whatever. Some people want that kind of very rustic feel to it, and that feeling that you can't, it can't be imitated anywhere else. This place is unique. These people are unique, and then that makes the wine just so much, more powerful, and that stays in your memory quite a bit. Now, obviously, we're in a situation now where the pandemic has happened, where there is a huge need to make sure that the wineries that are still receiving guests, so for example, here in Spain and in Catalonia, where I'm based, you can still visit wineries, but obviously there is a limited number of people that can go. You have to take a lot of measures in terms of sanitary measures and, following up on your visitors, who's coming, are you taking their temperature, things like that. So it does kind of interrupt in that experience of just kind of disconnecting. But it's what's happening in many industries now, is that COVID has really changed a lot of the businesses, the hospitality and tourism businesses, and how can you adapt to that is where a lot of wineries are at. But I think people will always want to travel, and I think people will always have a desire to know where their products are coming from, where their wine, where their cheese, where their bread, things like that, and particularly after lockdown, reconnecting to nature and to having these experiences that make you very grateful is really key. So I think that will still help wine tourism quite a bit.
We're at the tail end of 2020, thankfully. But it's of course, inevitable that the pandemic and its effect on hospitality, its effect on travel, it's always going to be sort of front of mind, and it's obviously a huge issue for Enotourism, because be they domestic tourists, as I'm sure there I know there is, having lived in Spain before, I know there's a lot of domestic tourism there as well, which I kind of people traveling region to region, and then there's the international element as well. What I just again, I'm kind of trying to put myself in the ears really of somebody who's listening, who's maybe working at a winery, and you know, they potentially put their Enotourism product kind of on the shelf, you know, because of the pandemic and kind of what's happened. And I'm just curious, you know, no pressure to sort of name anyone, but I'm just curious, you know, this year really, and you know, as recently as kind of, you know, it makes sense, you know, is there anybody that you've seen and you've experienced on the ground that's actually kind of, you would say, adapted well to the kind of current reality, in the sense of they are kind of, able to operate safely, but that in your view, it hasn't actually diluted that whole experience of connecting with the soil, escaping the day-to-day, and actually having a holiday at the end of the day?
I mean, I'm working in the Priorat, and there are a lot of wineries here that are small or medium-sized wineries. And one of the things that they have been taking advantage of quite a bit is the basically the vineyard area, the landscape, being outdoors, kind of taking all their experiences and putting them outdoors so that there is less fear of being so close to people or being in those confined spaces and things like that. Obviously, in the summer and the fall, this was fine, but now we're getting into a moment where it's getting much colder and you can't really do all the experiences. But in general, I think people are adapting pretty well. A lot of wineries here are adapting really well because they still want people to come and visit. They're getting more creative about creating different packages or doing online tastings and then packaging that with different experiences. Like I was telling you earlier as well, we're working on an app to develop different, to basically provide information to tourists who are going to be coming to Priorat of where they can find wineries that fit their needs. So if somebody is very, very concerned about, obviously, COVID measures, sanitary measures, and things like that, they can look that up on the app that we're developing and be able to find a winery that really highlights that as being a key thing. So I think there's a little bit of everything. Obviously, there's also wineries that have completely shut down and closed because they feel it's not worth the effort, because perhaps they were hiring a lot of staff that they can no longer afford to keep them on board if there's not that many tourists coming. So, you know, it's like the hospitality sector as well. People are trying to find creative ways to keep going in this situation.
If you've got the weather and you've got, you know, as you often do in beautiful wine regions all over the world, but again in Spain, you know, in Priorat, I'm sure it's just it's almost an advantage to do it outside, because you're reinforcing that you're not just in an urban environment, or you're in a barrel room, you know, downtown somewhere. You actually really are out there and among the vines and the smells, sounds that you see out there.
I think one of the things as well is that now, you know, usually it was when you were in a winery visit, in a sense, there was, the tourists could pretty much be as flexible or do what they want or whatever. And I feel like now tourists and clients are much more aware as well that they're going to go out of their comfort zone, of areas that they can't control. They're placing their trust on this winery, but they also have to do their part. So I think it's like a bit of a give and take, that they want to visit, they want to go to these places, they're willing to work around these restrictions, or accept the restrictions that are placed, or accept the follow-up methods. So if somebody wants to take your contact details, your temperature, you have to basically sanitize every time you come in. Clients are much more willing, or tourists are much more willing to do that, because they want to have the experience of, you know, something that they used to do before when there was no pandemic, or, you know, when there was no COVID. But we all know now that it's there, And so tourists are even adapting to that as well. So they're willing to there's nothing that they will consider exaggerated, right? There's nothing that they'll consider that, oh, this is too much. Oh, you're making this so difficult for us. It's like, no, we all want to kind of be safe. And even the wine tourist is okay with that. Groups are getting smaller, but there are still some wineries that are doing large groups, which I think isn't the best idea. But I mean, the visits I've done in the last couple of months have been really, really good. Obviously it's really hard to connect with your visitor when you have a mask on. How can you, there's so many verbal cues, there's so many, the body language is really important. Are you smiling? Nobody knows. But I think most people are just quite happy to be able to get out if they have the possibility to get out.
I think one thing that, maybe you do have data, maybe it's sort of anecdotal, it's more sort of, feel. But I think it kind of maybe to double background just to that kind of question of the international tourist versus the regional tourist. I mean, I read the wineries talking to you about, international tourists have kind of dropped off a cliff, or, expats, how are they reacting? The people, the non-Spanish people who are living in Spain, and the Spaniards who are living in Spain, and I guess the Hispanohablantes who are living in Spain as well. Is there kind of a different attitude from those different groups, or is there sort of not enough data to really say?
Well, one of the biggest things was that international tourists were the high value tourists. So they were willing to stay in regions much longer. They were paying more. They wanted more full experiences. So maybe the private visits, or maybe a top range kind of visit. And obviously that's changed quite a bit, because right now Spain isn't technically closed for visitors, but you have to justify your visit to Spain. You can't just come in. So that's obviously made it very, very difficult for international tourists to come. Neighboring countries such as the French come over and they can drive over. But what we're looking at now is the majority is local tourists. So people that are either from the Barcelona area that are going into Priorat wine region, or, people from different parts of Catalonia that can travel. Unfortunately, in Spain, the provinces are locked down, so you can't travel outside of your basically administrative province. You have to stay within that. So again, it's all local, and it's basically people who are able to move to different places now within the week, so not weekend visits. Some wineries have been able to adapt to this and have been flexible enough to adapt to these new kind of conditions, and other wineries prefer not to even, they're not going to open, they're not going to go through that step, because maybe it was hard enough for them to get clients in the first place. And now with all these difficulties, it just doesn't make sense. But obviously, there's been a huge drop in visitors. There's been a huge drop in tourists and international tourists, which were the bulk of a lot of the revenue that people were getting, has affected the wineries here. A lot of people are tired of the situation. A lot of people depended on tourism for different parts of their wine business. If you sold if you sold 30 or 40% of your wine at the cellar door, that would make a huge impact in your income. But also because a lot of the restaurants were closed, which makes sales drop as well. So you've got like this double whammy situation where you can't sell in restaurants or HoReCa, and then you don't get the tourists. So obviously it's very difficult, and people are trying to adapt as best they can. It's really, I think it's a really difficult situation, and trying to remain positive. Obviously everybody's trying that. and trying to communicate with your client even during these times, I think is vital. A lot of people are taking advantage of social media, Instagram, Zoom, doing tastings to continue to have that link with their visitors in hopes that once things open up again, you can start receiving guests again. I know, for example, I went to a cava producer or a corpinat producer recently, Jopart, in the Penedès. And they were receiving tons of guests, like they were receiving tons of visitors, and they have a really great wine experience, and they have a really great a team as well, really, really knowledgeable team of guides there. And this was a Sunday, and the place was packed. I mean, like, it was full. So there's still places that are doing it really well. There's still places that are finding ways to connect. And like I said, using those outdoor spaces, having tastings in the wine or having tastings in the vineyards, doing more walking tours through the vineyards, or finding ways to incorporate that element into the tourist experience is really important. And a lot of, like I said, Jopart was fantastic at that. They were really, really good at basically adapting. And I think that's the thing, right? Adapt or die. It sounds cruel, but you do have to find a way to make things work even in the situation. Obviously, then when you have, huge restrictions, you can't really do that much. But if you can connect to your visitors, like I said, on social media, or like this, I think we had this discussion earlier, that developing podcasts, developing different ways of communicating with your client or your consumer or the visitor is great. I mean, I think there's tons of wineries in Spain that have so many years of history that can basically tell their story through podcasting or through visuals or through YouTube videos or things like that. So trying to find different ways to adapt. Virtual tours is a big one. It's about getting creative to be able to reconnect with the people that you need and then hope for the best. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat together here in Spain, there in the UK. I mean,
have you seen anyone there kind of you're close to or you've experienced that, again, be welcome to sort of call out, in a very positive way, who you think, okay, these guys, some point during this year, they have adapted, and now they've kind of, really got their social media or whatever the channel is, they've got it on point, and now they're kind of sending out these boxes to people or something else, just something that they're kind of digitizing a bit of that Enotourism experience.
This is going to sound a contradiction to what I said previously, but I feel like a lot of the times some of the smaller wineries are better able to adapt because they maybe only cater to people who know them or that are looking for them and that are saying, I'm willing to travel during the weekdays to visit your winery because I can and because, they're able to adapt to their clients that they used to have. And I think sometimes they're doing it like really, really well. Obviously, if you have a huge wine tourism program, like a lot of big wineries in La Rioja, for example, or Barrio de Estación, that is 6 or 7 different wineries that all do wine tourism, I can imagine it's very difficult. But if you're a small winery and still receiving small, just a few visitors every now and then, people who know you already, people who know your wines and your brands, I think they're also able to, kind of not sail through it, but still find a way to do wine tourism during COVID times.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think hearing you talk there totally took me back to a wine shop in London, who have got such a strong community. It's for me, it's both one of the smallest wine bars, shops in London, and also probably my favorite to drink at, and probably one of, if not the best, And so, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's a neighborhood spot. It's not like in a touristy area. They don't rely on tourists. They rely on people, often quite knowledgeable or working in the wine trade, but even just people that just love good wine, love good atmosphere, and kind of who doesn't. And at the start of lockdown, because they're so small and because they're so close to their audience, they were for me, the first ones that I saw starting blind tastings, and the little miniature bottle, and it was literally the owner decanting a bottle from the shelf, and his staff and people coming in and picking them up and dropping them off at their friend's house. And that innovation happened like that. And we've often, I think, spoken about, how interesting are these Instagram lives, the jury's maybe still out on some of them, but the owner or the one of the co-founders, Gus, his Instagram lives were incredible, because obviously the people in the chat were his friends. So they were all like, joking with him and teasing him. And, he'd really put a lot of effort into that, but he knew who he was talking to. And I think that really shows that if from years and years that they've developed that product and that audience and that kind of family around them, it was then really easy from the outside. Obviously it's still all the hard work and the logistics and everything, but on a sort of just knowing who you're talking to level, he knew who he was talking to, because he had already had that connection. And I would imagine that's a similar point to what you're making there. It's like the smaller wineries, they know their regulars, they know what they want to see. They probably know them by name, so they can be very personal, even though it's delivered remotely / digitally.
And I mean, I guess one of the positive things here would be many of the wineries, the smaller wineries, now that you can visit, a lot of the times you're visiting with either the winemaker or the owner, because they've got nowhere to go either. So they're like, okay, sure, come and visit. And that's like an added bonus where you're like, oh, amazing. I would have never imagined to be able to do this visit with this person. But because they have time now, and unfortunately we can't move very far, that's what happens, is that at the end of the day, you have kind of like the silver lining is the fact that you can do tourism in very small places and have these added bonuses of being with somebody, with a family or the winemaker or things like that. Obviously, that doesn't happen in all wineries, but in the last couple of weeks, I have done a few visits, and it's been amazing, because you've got just these personalized experiences. I think one of the big things as well is to continue communicating with your visitor. Like you said, with the people that you already have these connections with, or past visitors that still follow you on social media. So still finding ways to communicate with them and to say, we're still here, we're still present, we're still doing these things. Or finding ways, putting nice photos, putting really enticing, maybe even more personal videos, if you can use videos on your phone or on your accounts, and you want to have that more personal touch to it. I think it's really important for wineries to take advantage of that. And I mean, one of the big things, obviously, with lockdown was the fact that everybody all of a sudden, if you didn't have an online shop, you were busy like setting that up as quickly as possible. Now, if you don't have any sort of social media to be able to connect with your visitors, you want to do that as well. You can still communicate in a different way, and you can still kind of get your visitors pumped up for when things will be a little bit more normal. Just basically keeping that communication alive. And I think that's something that obviously as well, that the use of different communication tools, podcasts, social media, blogs as well. If a winery has a blog and they can continue updating their blog, people are going to be reading, and people are going to be connecting if they really feel connected to the winery.
Yeah, totally. And it actually, it really brought up a conversation that I had earlier in the year with a restaurateur / proprietor in the UK. And it's something he said really, I thought was really interesting, was that he and his team had actually stepped back from posting things on Instagram, even though they were in a gorgeous location, this sort of, rustic, more, sort of isolated, green countryside location in England with, with a lovely building, a lovely aspect. But he said he'd actually stepped back because I forget the exact words that he used, but it was in the sense of he kind of didn't want to kind of rub it in people's faces, that he was in this beautiful location, and people were, kind of trapped in a small flat in the center of whatever city. And I think there is balance. I think tone is supremely important, but I also feel like the intention says it. I think we know when we're posting a picture to show off and to sort of inspire FOMO. And I think we know when we're just, we're proud of what we've got around us. We're proud of our surroundings and we're proud of what we're doing, and we want to share, and we want to almost kind of digitally fill that gap. Before we might have been showing people around the winery and the kitchen and wherever our favorite spots on the estate in person, but I think you're right. I think now we have the opportunity to at least show them those things digitally.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I totally agree with you. And even in my own personal Instagram, I try and, I'm aware of the fact that there are people that are completely locked down or in urban areas and can't get out. And I have the luxury to be able to travel, even if it's a little bit. I have been in lockdown, just like most of us have been in lockdown. So I know what it's like to be like, get me out, But I think as long as you're still honest to the way you're communicating and haven't changed that, and not, of course, you're not rubbing it in people's faces. But if the winery is like, we're going to start winter pruning in this beautiful landscape. Well, they can't help it that they're in this beautiful landscape. That's where their vines are. That's where their vineyard is. They have other struggles and other challenges that maybe they may not have as many workers available. And so they'll be out there, freezing. But at least the picture's nice. But at the same time, it's like, it's an honest perspective. And I think that's one of the things that I think we probably had this conversation as well about having that honest, the honest approach with your clients. If you're that kind of winery, of course. I mean, everybody does a little bit of different things, but as long as you're staying honest to your brand, to your story, and then your visuals are actually still in line with what you would do normally, then I don't see a problem with that. But obviously you do want to acknowledge the fact that there are people locked down and there are people that can't go out, and be sensitive to that. But I think, a beautiful picture is also some way to say, hey, you know what? After this is over, we'll be here for you. We're waiting for you. We can't wait to reconnect with you or get to know you for the first time if you've never been here before.
I was on a press trip to Valdobbiadene, the Prosecco region, and some of the producers who are presenting there, some of them were in a sort of, more a kind of, I guess, corporate type environment. They were, in a room of the winery, I guess that's as corporate as it gets at a winery. But yeah, I totally appreciated the producers who, I still remember one of them had set up a table out in this sort of shady spot under a tree out in the vineyards, and you could see the little beautiful little town, and you could hear the bells ringing, chiming on the hour, and but they weren't sort of, oh, look at this is so beautiful. They were doing what they were kind of there to do, which was to talk about the wines and to educate us about their region, and they did that fantastically well. But I just thought it was a lovely bonus to be able to see really where they were, really see the landscape and really kind of get for me a stronger sense of what is going to be in my glass. Exactly. In the day, that's for me that's the huge power of any product, and especially wine for me is its ability to communicate that unique sense of place.
Right, of course. And I think even before, if we look back, I don't know, 100 years ago, people didn't travel at all. It was it was very difficult for most people to travel, but there were still people who were writing. You've got a lot of travel literature that made people excited about what the world had, or imaginative, or things like that. And I think that's really important, especially now that it is such an emotional time for people. You're going through everybody's going through difficulties and struggles and challenges in one way or another. And to have a break from that and to say, there's this beautiful spot, and this is where we're located, and this is what we do, and this is who we are. And again, keeping that authentic and honest message that your winery has is really important. It's really, really important, I think.
For me, this has been, such an interesting conversation, but I guess kind of leading towards closing now, really. An area that I, haven't really probed you on and we've not heard so much about has been your current area of study, to sort of take us a little bit inside, your current role and what does that mean? And maybe, just in the sort of the flow of the episode, we're maybe, I guess, stepping back slightly from the practicalities and those fantastic tips that you've given that people can, I think, try out and, take us a little bit more inside of the sort of the current academics and then the current academic side of Enotourism that you're involved with.
Okay. So that's not very exciting, but it has to be done. So most of the times I'm like most people, I'm at home and I have to read and write and produce different papers and things like that. My thesis is on the vineyard landscape. So it is on, obviously I started it prior to COVID. So for me, it was just because I thought it was such a powerful tool for the tourism experience. And I think it's one of the things that draws people into a region is the beauty of the landscape. Because there is a disconnect with nature and because there is a disconnect with, I feel, with the community. And a lot of people are looking for wine tourism as a way to connect better with their product, with wine, but also to escape from maybe an urban area that, doesn't have that much peace, tranquility, calmness that you can get in a vineyard area. So my studies are essentially looking at the vineyard landscape, particularly looking at World Heritage vineyard landscape and how that brand, the World Heritage designation, can be basically a brand that can help the region have a certain kind of tourist while helping the conservation and preservation of what the World Heritage is intended to do. So it's kind of finding that balance of how can we use this World Heritage brand to get recognition to say we have not only great wine, but we have this beautiful landscape. We're protecting it, but we still want people to come and visit. So one of the big dangers with tourism, I'm not sure what it will look like afterwards, but one of the big dangers prior to lockdown and to COVID was the over-tourism in many places that were destroying not only urban areas, but rural areas as well. We saw a lot of wine regions that were, there are huge wineries with these very... with architecture that just doesn't belong in that area and is not authentic to the area and perhaps is visually unattractive to the actual natural landscape. So it's trying to find a way to protect an area that has a lot of history from eroding from basically taking away of what makes it authentic. Champagne is one of the regions that I study. And again, there I'm looking quite a bit at the brand of Champagne, the World Heritage UNESCO brand that they use simultaneously, and how the different stakeholders and the agents are using wine tourism, their wine, their product, their brands, and they're incorporating everything together to create a holistic experience and one that still helps in the preservation of different features of the landscape. The same is looking at Priorat as well. So Priorat is a region that was looking to get the UNESCO World Heritage designation, not just for wine, so not just vineyard areas, but everything as well, vineyard, olive, different types of agricultural products. So olive trees, almond, hazelnut trees, everything that basically created this landscape, and to try and protect it from over tourism, overdevelopment, and keeping some sort of authenticity of the area. So then how can we use this brand is exactly what I'm trying to study. And I think now more than ever, the vineyard landscape is really important. And every time I'm able to go out to Priorat, it's one thing that I'm like, God, I wish everybody could come, because it's so beautiful, and because, you know, you can disconnect, and because you can find a way to just marvel at nature. And for me, that's great. And that's one of the reasons why I really like studying. That's the academic part. And then the work that I do with Priorat Enoturisme is also online. So most of the times I'm just contacting wineries. I'm trying to get different information from them. I'm working with developers to develop the web app that we're working on. Hopefully we'll be launching sometime probably in the summer season of next year. And again, my day-to-day, you know, is behind a computer. But I know that my Instagram or my social media is like, oh, now I'm wherever, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing that. And it's like, well, you know, I'm a visual person. I really enjoy, I think visuals are so important. And I enjoy that sort of communication as well. I'm a little bit behind on the PhD, so that's going to take some time. And the web app that we're developing with the Priorat Enoturisme hopefully will be ready, and will be, like, we're going through the testing phases right now. So hopefully we'll be ready to launch spring or summer. I mean, that's what we're hoping for.
Starting from the app and then opening out into anything else. But I'm just curious to know, like, you know, what are your hopes for that app when it hopefully goes live next year? What is the sort of impact that you're hoping, you know, when you look ahead to that moment?
I think one of the things that's really important when you're visiting a region as a tourist, so if you don't know anything about a wine region or any region, you want information. That's all you want. You want to know opening hours. You want to know where. You want to know, can I pay by whatever, credit card, or, you know, kind of very basic information. And I think it's very hard to find that information when you visit many wine regions, because either they're working alone, or they don't have that information available, or things like that. And one of the unique things of Priorat Enoturisme is that they're an association of different private wineries, and not just wineries, but restaurants, hotels, different travel agencies as well. So it's a collective, it's a group. And what they do is they try to help each other basically to create a certain level quality of touristic experience. Now, my hope is that with the app, it will really help a lot of the wineries develop a more sophisticated or more professional wine tourism experience. That doesn't mean that they don't have to be authentic. That means that they're taking into account the fact that these little things, opening hours, you know, when are the visits, etc., that is really important for a visitor. And the app will have all that information and more, and it will allow the visitor to actually understand what's available in the region, where they can have lunch, where they can do visits, where they can do an olive oil tasting. So basically working within that network to have all that information that someone needs. Obviously it is a big project because there are a lot of different owners, and it's going to require a lot of coordination, and a lot of the times it's going to require updating information. So there are a few challenges, but I think is a great idea, and I'm really happy to be part of this team, because I think it's a lot of the, basically all the people that are members or part of the organization association are really, really passionate about having a certain type of experience, connecting with people, being authentic, the kind of tourism that I like. So I like that experience as an individual. And so very happy to be working with them, that they develop different products that can cater to different types of visitors, but at the same time still remain very true and honest to who they are.
And a massive thank you to you, Vinka. Absolutely great to have you back on the podcast. Do be sure to check below for the links to Vinka's blog and her Instagram handle. If you know someone who would find this episode useful, please do share the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/446. And if you found it really useful, then do please leave the episode an iTunes review on the same link. Next time on the Spanish Enotourism special, I'll be speaking to Maria de Simón Baranda, president of the Ruta del Vino Rioja Alavesa. See you next time.